I've spent my life saving carefully, not for luxury, but for security, especially after my cancer diagnosis. One afternoon after chemo, my daughter offered to drive me home. We passed a Porsche dealership, and her husband joked about his dream car. Before I could even react, she pulled out my credit card and told him to use it because I wouldn't live long enough to spend my money anyway. They forgot one thing though: I may be sick, but I'm not stupid. And I've learned that when people show you who they really are, believe them. 3 days later, they were sitting in jail cells, and I was test driving a Porsche with the sun on my face. My name is Helena Brooks, and I am 64 years old. Chemo feels like a thief that visits quietly and takes a little more of you each time. Some days it steals sleep, some days it steals appetite, and some days it just steals strength without warning. The hospital chairs are all the same, but the people in them never are. I watch faces come and go, each one wearing a private storm. My daughter insists on driving me because she says I shouldn't be alone, and I've learned not to argue when my bones ache and my head spins. I used to be independent: grocery runs, gardening, fixing little things around the house. Now I move slower, sit often, and notice the world in smaller pieces. I thought illness would bring my family closer. I didn't realize it would show me which cracks were already there, hidden beneath politeness and phone calls that always ended too quickly. There's a strange math to illness. It isn't just pills and appointments, it's bills and insurance forms and numbers that rise faster than courage. I saved all my life, carefully and quietly, tucking money away for emergencies I prayed would never come. I never imagined the emergency would be my own body turning against me. My daughter keeps telling me not to worry, that I won't need it forever anyway. She laughs when she says it, like it's a harmless joke, but the words linger long after the sound fades. I check my bank statements late at night, more out of habit than anxiety, counting zeros the same way I count pills in their plastic bottles. Money was always meant to be a safety net, not a prize, not a weapon. I didn't know yet how badly someone I loved wanted to climb into that net and cut it loose from beneath me. I hate relying on other people. Asking for help feels like confessing a weakness I never wanted to own. But chemo doesn't bargain, and some days even turning the key in the front door feels like work. So I let my daughter drive me, pick up prescriptions, and sit with me in waiting rooms that smell like antiseptic and fear. She scrolls on her phone while I watch the clock. Her husband comes along sometimes, acting impatient, like kindness is something he invoices by the hour. I tell myself they're trying, that everyone handles illness differently. Still, I notice the sighs when I walk slowly, the glances they share when I ask a question twice. I swallow the guilt like another pill. It's hard to tell where gratitude ends and dependence begins, or when dependence quietly turns into control. That day, the sky was the washed-out color of dishwater, heavy with rain that couldn't quite fall. We left the clinic, my head wrapped in a scarf I hoped looked intentional. Traffic crawled, and no one spoke. Then he suggested taking the scenic route, his words, not mine. I didn't argue. I rarely do anymore. We drove past boutiques and restaurants I used to visit when walking didn't feel like climbing a hill. Then the road curved, and a glass front building appeared like a polished jewel, a Porsche dealership, all metal and shine. He let out a low whistle, and my daughter finally smiled, turning toward him like he was the only person in the car. I sat in the backseat, quiet, invisible, watching the world slide by like a movie I hadn't bought a ticket for. He said it like a child might talk about a toy, careless, hopeful, and hungry. "That's my dream car," he murmured, staring at a sleek silver model displayed on a rotating platform. My daughter laughed, nudging him playfully, asking which color he'd choose, what features he'd want, whether he'd let her drive it. They spun fantasies in the front seat while I pressed my hand against the window, watching reflections ripple across the glass. For a moment, I almost enjoyed listening to them dream. Then I remembered the envelope of medical bills on my kitchen table and the way I had divided my savings into careful columns, planning for rent, medication, and maybe, if I was lucky, a little peace. A sports car belonged to a different universe, or so I thought. It happened so quickly that I almost wondered if the medication had clouded my mind. He joked about buying the car, and before the joke had time to fade, my daughter reached into her purse and pulled out my credit card. Not hers, mine. She pressed it into his hand like she was passing him a pen. "Use Mom's card," she said lightly. "She's got about 500,000 saved. She won't live long enough to spend it anyway." The words sliced the air clean in two. I sat frozen, heartbeat loud in my ears, watching my name glint on the plastic between their fingers. They didn't look back at me to see if I'd heard. They didn't need to. The truth was carelessly spoken and completely intentional. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't even ask them to stop the car. I simply folded my hands in my lap and let the silence grow heavy around us. Pain doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it slips in quietly and sits beside you like an unwanted passenger. I realized in that moment that the people I trusted with my life had already spent it for me in their minds. I wasn't a mother anymore. I was a walking account balance, an expiration date wrapped in soft clothes and scarves. When we reached home, I thanked them for the ride, unlocked my front door, and sat in the dark living room long after the engine noise faded. Something inside me didn't just crack, it shifted. And once it moved, it could never go back to where it was. That night, she sat at the kitchen table with the lights off and the house silent. The sentence replayed in her head like a broken recording: she won't live long enough to spend it anyway. It hadn't been a joke, it had been a strategy. Suddenly, so many little moments made sense. The way they asked about bank balances, the way they insisted on handling mail, the constant hints about helping with finances. They'd already decided her future for her, not medically, financially. She felt a strange calm settle in. Grief could wait, panic could wait. Right now, she needs clarity and proof. Because if they were willing to treat her life like an expiring coupon, they were capable of much more. She logged into her accounts with trembling fingers, each password feeling like a lifeline. The balances were still intact for now, but she noticed things she'd never paid attention to before: spending limits, transfer caps, credit allowances. The numbers suddenly looked fragile, as though a careless swipe could shatter them. She printed statements and tucked them carefully into a folder, labeling nothing so it wouldn't attract attention. She wasn't suspicious, she was prepared. That's what she told herself anyway. But deep down, a painful truth formed. Trust isn't something you can deposit again once it's been withdrawn. She began treating her money the way she now treated people, cautiously, watching for signs she had ignored for far too long. She didn't confront them. Instead, she watched. She listened. She noticed how easily they discussed expensive trips, remodels, and investments, always in future tense, always assuming resources would magically appear. They never asked how she felt. They asked when her next appointment was, when she'd be too tired to run errands, when she'd need rest. Their kindness began to feel like surveillance. She smiled when expected and nodded at the right moments, but a quiet wall went up inside her. If they believed she was naive, she would let them keep believing it. Sometimes the safest place to stand is behind the curtain, watching the performance unfold until you know exactly who's acting. Her phone had a simple recording app, nothing fancy. One afternoon, while they chatted in the kitchen, she slipped it into her pocket and let it run. She didn't want revenge, she wanted the truth to exist outside her own memory. And the truth came easily. They spoke about limits, large purchases, and how she won't fight it, she hates confrontation. Each sentence landed softly, cruelly. Hearing it aloud hurt more than when she'd first witnessed it. At least now the betrayal had a voice, clear, cold, and undeniable. That night she saved the file twice and whispered a small promise to herself. This time, no one would call her dramatic when she said something was wrong. She began creating a map of her life on paper, bank copies, transaction logs, account screenshots folded neatly into envelopes. She stored them in places no one else would think to look. It felt strange, documenting her own innocence, but she knew how the world worked. People love a tidy story, especially one where money blurs the facts. So she built evidence like a fortress, brick by careful brick. She updated passwords, added alerts, and quietly froze certain features on her accounts. Each step stole a little energy, but it returned something more valuable: control. For the first time since chemo began, she felt like she was guiding the ship instead of simply trying not to drown. She made an appointment with a lawyer, not the flashy kind, just someone who listened more than he talked. He didn't laugh when she explained what had happened. He didn't call it a misunderstanding. He called it what it was: attempted financial exploitation. Together, they created safety nets, fraud alerts, spending restrictions, powers of attorney rewritten with sharp, protective language. He explained how charges work, what evidence matters when the law steps in. She left the office exhausted but steadier. It was comforting to know there were rules and people willing to enforce them. She wasn't a victim waiting for disaster. She was a woman placing locks on doors she had once left open. The final step was the hardest: pretending nothing had changed. She cooked meals with them, accepted rides, listened to their plans as though she didn't know the ending. But behind that calm exterior, everything was set: the alerts, the recordings, the documents, the law. She didn't want to destroy them. She wanted the truth to reveal itself honestly without her pushing. And it would, because greed always believes it's smarter than consequences. She placed the folder of evidence in a drawer, smoothed the pages with gentle hands, and whispered a quiet goodbye to the trust she once had. The next move wouldn't be hers, it would be theirs, and she would be ready when it came. She called the bank and spoke slowly, carefully, making sure every word counted. She explained that her cards must never approve large purchases without direct confirmation from her. The representative listened kindly and set layered alerts: texts, emails, and phone calls for anything unusual. She also requested a standing note on her account that any high-value transaction required in-person verification. It wasn't about paranoia. It was about creating guardrails. When she hung up, she felt a strange strength settle in her chest. Illness might weaken the body, but awareness sharpened the mind. If they tried anything, the system would shine a bright light on it, and lights tend to scare away the worst intentions. Next, she visited her local branch, cane tapping softly against the marble floor. The manager knew her from years of quiet deposits and conservative choices. When he heard her story, his face tightened with concern rather than doubt. Together, they reviewed every account, adjusted limits, and added extra verification steps that couldn't be bypassed with charm or pressure. He assured her that the bank would watch closely and notify authorities if needed. For the first time in a long while, she felt supported, not pitied. She walked out with a folder of paperwork and the comforting knowledge that the walls around her life were now reinforced with more than hope. At the station, she sat across from an officer who listened without interrupting. She didn't dramatize, she simply presented facts, the recordings, the statements, the financial setup. The officer explained how financial crimes often start quietly and escalate fast, especially when someone believes they'll never be caught. A report was filed, not as an accusation, but as a precaution. If a fraudulent attempt occurred, there would already be a record, a trail linking intention to action. She left feeling heavier yet safer, as though she had finally placed her fears into official hands. Whatever came next would no longer be invisible or easily dismissed as a misunderstanding. The hardest part was the waiting. She went about life as usual, attending treatments, sipping tea, and answering her daughter's cheerful messages with equal politeness. Outside, nothing looked different. Inside, everything had changed. She watched quietly as small hints of impatience crept into their voices, talk of timelines, of opportunities, of not missing the chance. She said nothing. She cooked their favorite meals and smiled when they complimented her cooking a little too sweetly. Every alert that didn't arrive felt like a breath held and released. She wasn't hoping they'd fail. She was hoping they'd choose not to try. But greed rarely backs down once it smells an open door. The alert arrived on a dull Tuesday afternoon while she was folding laundry. Her phone buzzed. High-value charge attempt detected, Porsche dealership. Her chest tightened, but her hands stayed steady. The bank had declined the card exactly as planned. Within minutes, a second call came, this time from the fraud department, confirming the attempt and asking if she'd authorized it. She answered calmly, firmly, no. The representative said law enforcement had already been notified due to the report on file. She thanked them and sat very still, listening to the house tick in the silence. They had really done it with confidence, without hesitation, as if her life were already over. While she stayed home, the scene at the dealership unfolded with clinical precision. The employee ran the card again, then paused as the system flashed warnings. A manager joined, followed by a discreet call to the bank, then the police. Her daughter and son-in-law shifted from irritation to panic as questions grew sharper. Signatures, identification, authorization, none of it matched the truth. When officers arrived, the conversation ended. She didn't witness it firsthand, but later she would read the report. Attempted fraud, financial exploitation, identity abuse. All the legal terms for what she already knew, that the people she trusted had gambled on her silence and lost. The knock on her door came that evening. 2 officers stood gently in the doorway, confirming what she already suspected. Both had been taken into custody. They explained her rights, the next steps, and the support available. She listened quietly, feeling sorrow rather than triumph. This wasn't a victory. It was the truth finally standing up straight. After they left, she sat in her living room and let herself breathe. She had protected the life she still intended to live, however long that might be. And though betrayal still ached, she knew one thing clearly now: her worth wasn't measured in savings or sympathy. It was measured in strength, and she had more than anyone realized. She was asked to come to the station to give a formal statement. The room was small, bright, and unfamiliar, with a metal table that made every sound echo. Detectives spoke gently, yet their questions were precise: dates, times, amounts, conversations. She answered calmly, sliding the folder of evidence across the table: recordings, bank logs, legal notes. They were surprised at how prepared she was. She explained that when trust breaks, preparation becomes a form of self-defense. Leaving the station, she didn't feel powerful or proud, just tired. Still, there was relief in knowing the truth no longer lived only in her head. In the days that followed, messages poured in, frantic, defensive, desperate. They claimed it was a misunderstanding, a joke gone wrong, a lapse in judgment. They said they loved her. They said stress made them irrational. They said anything except the one word that mattered: sorry. She didn't reply. Silence sometimes carries more truth than arguments ever could. Friends began calling too, confused and shocked, asking if what they'd heard was real. She didn't badmouth anyone. She simply said the law would sort it out. Quietly, she grieved not the money, but the illusion of loyalty she'd carried for years. When the paperwork arrived, the language was blunt and emotionless. Attempted fraud, financial exploitation of a dependent adult, identity misuse. The words looked clinical on the page, but each one represented a choice they had made knowingly, deliberately. Prosecutors explained that her preparation had made the case nearly airtight. She listened, nodding, hands folded in her lap. No satisfaction came from hearing it, just a deep, steady acceptance. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was a legal reality with consequences that could not be laughed away, minimized, or buried under family guilt. Her fight for justice was ending, but her real healing was only beginning. Stay with me, and if you're new here, hit subscribe so you don't miss how it unfolds. Courtrooms have a way of shrinking people. The benches were hard, the air still, the silence heavy. She watched them enter in formal clothes, their faces pale and stiff. For a brief moment, she remembered birthday parties and holiday dinners, then the memory faded beneath the present truth. Lawyers spoke in careful sentences while judges listened without expression. Everything was documented, recorded, preserved. She answered questions when asked, steady and respectful. When the day ended, she walked out alone, leaning slightly on her cane, feeling the strange mixture of sorrow and closure only a courtroom can create. Back home, she looked around her small, tidy house and realized it was now safer than it had ever been, yet emptier too. Trust doesn't break loudly. It crumbles, then leaves behind a silence that fills every room. She boxed up old photos, not out of spite, but to give her heart space to breathe. Family should protect, not calculate. Love should comfort, not cost. She let herself cry quietly, not because she was weak, but because grieving the living is one of the hardest griefs of all. And then she made tea, fed herself, and kept going. Word traveled quickly through town. Neighbors who once waved casually now stopped to ask if she needed help with groceries or rides. Some were angry on her behalf. Others were stunned into awkward silence. She accepted kindness without bitterness, refusing to let embarrassment chase her into hiding. People should talk, and in talking, they learned how common financial abuse can be. If her story helped someone else notice warning signs, then at least something good could grow from the wreckage. She had spent years being quiet. Now she understood the power of being heard. Eventually, there was one final meeting, brief, formal, and guarded. No hugs, no tears, just a last exchange of belongings and a soft, heavy farewell that carried years of history inside it. They still insisted they never meant harm. She simply replied that intention doesn't erase impact. Then she walked away, spine straight, steps steady, her heart aching but firm. Some doors don't slam shut, they close slowly with a whisper. And when they do, the silence that follows isn't empty, it's peaceful. The last hearing arrived quietly, without drama or raised voices. Papers were read, charges confirmed, and sentences given with the flat certainty of law. She sat very still, listening as consequences finally landed where they belonged. There was no victory in it, only a solemn acknowledgement of truth. The judge spoke about trust, responsibility, and the seriousness of exploiting the vulnerable. She wondered when she had stopped being seen as a mother and started being seen as a target. When the gavel fell, she felt a chapter close. Not neatly, not cleanly, but finally, leaving the courthouse, she didn't celebrate. She simply breathed, deeply, freely. The world looked strangely ordinary, traffic lights blinking, people chatting, a breeze playing with the trees, yet everything felt lighter. The constant fear of what might happen to her savings, her home, her future dissolved. She could finally rest without watching shadows. That night she slept for 8 unbroken hours for the first time in months. Relief doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives softly, like a blanket laid gently over tired shoulders. With the legal noise fading, she turned her attention back to the quieter work of rebuilding. She organized paperwork, simplified accounts, and surrounded herself with people who showed up without wanting anything. Some days she cooked small meals and invited neighbors over. Other days she took slow walks, reminding her legs they still belonged to her. Healing wasn't sudden. It came in small pieces, a laugh here, a confident decision there. She didn't erase the past. She just stopped letting it steer. One afternoon, she drove past that same Porsche dealership. For a moment, her chest tightened. Then she surprised herself by pulling in, not out of spite, out of curiosity. A kind salesman treated her with respect, answering questions without pressure. She didn't buy the flashiest model. She chose a simple, elegant car that fit her hands and heart comfortably. When she signed the papers, it wasn't about money. It was about reclaiming choice, proving to herself that she could still do things for joy, not survival. The first time she took the car onto an open road, she rolled the windows down and let the wind thread through her hair. Music played softly, an old song she loved, and for a moment she forgot hospitals, courtrooms, and heartbreak. She wasn't a patient. She wasn't a victim. She was simply a woman driving beneath a wide sky, alive and present in the moment. She laughed, a real laugh, at how light she suddenly felt. Life settled into a gentle rhythm. Treatments continued, but fear no longer ruled every corner of her mind. She learned to enjoy quiet mornings, warm blankets, simple meals, and conversations with people who valued her, not her savings. Peace didn't look dramatic, it looked ordinary. And ordinary felt beautiful. In the end, the greatest decision she made wasn't legal or financial, it was emotional. She chose herself, her dignity, her safety, her happiness. She forgave just enough to keep bitterness from poisoning her spirit, but not enough to forget the lesson. She kept driving, kept living, kept choosing life on her own terms. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough.